The first thing I would like to say in this regard is that it seems to me, as we look forward to the next 25 years, the most striking thing is that society and the human, because the two cannot be separated, is under siege. And if nothing is done, society will soon become an obsolete concept. It won't exist neither as a concept nor as a reality. And therefore, you can foresee immediately the implications in terms of the system of knowledge we have relied upon since the beginning of modernity. If society becomes obsolete, a huge chunk of the disciplines we rely upon will automatically become obsolete too. It might not exist as a concept or even as a reality because some of the most powerful forces shaping our present are hostile to the idea of society. The idea of society understood as a community of consent in which members disagree on many things, but they agree on one thing. And what is that one thing? That one thing is the recognition that there is something they owe each other simply because of their sharing membership of the same species. And it seems to me that if the most powerful forces shaping our present are not contained to some extent, we will not even agree on that minimal thing. And that's something they owe each other. Exceeds calculation, it exceeds quantification, measurement. It is something that is priceless because it cannot be put in a price. Of course, there are disputes over what this consists of, but there is no doubt that it exists, and the task of the political is to keep defining and redefining it, constituting and reconstituting it, endlessly performing it and enacting it in laws, institutions, and in the culture at large. Now, the times we live in, which are, I'm sorry to use such broad terms, governed by neoliberal rationality, these times tell us that there is no society. There are markets. Markets are the only reality. And on a market, there are only competitors. And in a competition, there are only winners and losers. If you win, great. If you lose, bad luck. It's your problem. In such a context, of course, there are no collectives. There are firms. We are numbers. We are codes. We are a set of algorithms produced in an endless and violent process of abstraction. And the end point of this violence is, of course, the emptying out of the category of the future, which the rector spoke eloquently about this morning during the launch of the Institute, and its replacement by a dystopian condition, which we see in our cities and in the world in general. So that's the first remark I would like to make. The second remark has to do with how is it that we give a new lease of life to the idea of the social. Because we cannot possibly let go of the idea of the social, which, I repeat, itself is inseparable from some kind of idea of the human. It seems to me that to give a new lease of life to that idea of the social, we will need to reopen the future of our planet to all who inhabit it. And that task of reopening the future of our planet to all who inhabit it is arguably the most urgent and the most important political and ethical quandary of our times. What I mean by that is that what we are witnessing are two things. On the one hand, a planetary turn, which is different from just a national, local turn. A planetary turn and the return of big questions. Big questions had disappeared somewhat over the last, I would say, quarter of a century. They are back. Big questions are back, whether we talk about the environment, whether we talk about water. These are planetary big questions. Now, it's not easy to deal with them because they are coming back in a context of an apparent exhaustion of the Western archive. And most of the modern knowledge, scientific knowledge, philosophical knowledge, has relied on the Western archive, and the proposition I'm making is that that archive has reached a state of exhaustion. To what degree, of course, we can debate on that. Now, when I say the Western archive, I mean, of course, not something simplistic. It is very old, it is very complex, it does not belong to the West itself. In fact, we contributed to its making. It's complex because part of its power and its attraction derives from the fact that it contains within itself the resources for its own critique and its own repudiation. So to some extent, we cannot do without it. We'll have to work with and against it, at least for those of us coming from places such as ours. So we will not need to reject it. We might not even need to provincialize it. But there is an absolute necessity, if we want to reopen the future of the planet to all who inhabit it, to open other archives. If we want to go forward, we have to reopen African archives, Asian archives, other archives. So that's the second point I would like to put forward as a possible task for the Institute, in any case, when it comes to the sciences of the human and of the society. I already, and that's the third point, mentioned that very few questions today will be resolved within a purely national frame, and I'm saying it taking into consideration, I mean, this very place, South Africa, which once in a while tends to understand itself as exceptional. So the denationalization of the major questions, of course, have set of implications in terms of what is the unit of analysis, to what extent is it that we rehabilitate comparative studies as world studies, the fact that the world can be, and in fact, should be studied from different places, a point Peter and the rector were insisting upon again this morning. It seems to me that without the reopening of these various archives, we will not be able to address questions of life and human futures, questions which themselves, and the previous orators gestured towards this, will have to be studied at the intersection of various disciplines, all of which requires a new distribution of intelligence. Now, let me end with 2 points, which were also present, especially in the rector's speech this morning. The first one has to do with the kind of epoch we live in. It seems to me that we more and more recognize the fact that an epoch scale boundary has been crossed within the last 2 centuries of human life on Earth. And that as a consequence of this, we have entered an entirely new, deep geological time, that of the Anthropocene. The concept of the Anthropocene itself denotes, it seems to me, a new geological epoch, characterized, of course, by human-induced massive and accelerated changes to the Earth's climate, land, oceans, and biosphere. I think that the scale and the magnitude and significance of these environmental change is the most important question facing the humanity, since at stake is the very possibility of its extinction. That for the first time in our short history, because human history is very short compared to the history of the Earth. History of the Earth is huge. Our history as humans is like this. And for the first time in our short history, the possibility of human extinction is real. It is a distinct possibility. We therefore have to rethink the human, not necessarily from the perspective of its mastery of the creation, as we used to, but from the perspective of its finitude and, as I said, possible extinction. And this kind of rethinking, to be sure, has been underway for some time now. The problem is that we seem to have entirely avoided it, at least in Africa, in spite of the existence of a rich archive in this regard. This rethinking of the human has unfolded along several lines. We don't have the time to summarize them here. I already indicated a few in any case. But let me just say one thing. We can no longer afford. We can no longer afford the dualistic partitions of mind from bodies, meaning and matter, or nature, from culture, which we have inherited. They can no longer hold. So the end of the binaries and dualisms, and which therefore opens up a new possibility for a fruitful interaction between the human sciences, the natural sciences, and the geological sciences. Let me end with the question of race, which takes an entirely different shape, form, and content in the age of climate change. Race is back on the agenda, almost everywhere. And it takes very many different forms. It is again re-entering the domain of biological truth, viewed now through a molecular gaze, in the sense that a new molecular deployment of race is emerging, paradoxically, out of genomic thinking. And this is something we have to take very seriously. We have to take it seriously because we are witnessing, almost worldwide, a renewed interest in terms of the identification of biological differences. So how is it that we recapture the question of, let me put it like that, sameness, that which we share, as opposed to that which makes us different? It seems to me it will be one of the most important ethical and political questions of the future, if not already of the present. And I would suggest that the Johannesburg Institute of Advanced Study pays a special attention to those intersections of race, of genomics, and politics, as part of the attempt at reopening the future of our planet to all who inhabit it. Thank you.
The University of Johannesburg. Rethink, reinvent.